Hi, I'm Carter Wilson, bestselling author and writing coach. And welcome back to Motivations for Writers. Every time you hit play on one of these episodes, I kind of imagine you out there with a part of you craving connection. Maybe you're sitting at your desk with your coffee next to you, staring at a blank page that feels like it's mocking you. I've definitely been there. Maybe you're on a walk, earbuds in, trying to shake the fog out of your head and think of your next great idea. Maybe you're in your car driving to work, and you're kind of desperate for a voice that says, "You're not alone in this." Because let's be honest, writing is lonely. You spend hours in your head with characters nobody else can see, in worlds nobody else can visit, at least not yet. And when you do try to explain what you're doing, when you say to your family or friends, "I'm working on a novel," most of them honestly don't know what to say. Their eyes glaze over, they nod politely, and I swear you can almost hear them thinking, "Oh, that's cute. You're still doing that little book thing." But you and I know better. We know this isn't a little thing. We know that sitting down to write is one of the hardest, most courageous things a person can do. Because it's not just typing words, it's opening your heart, exposing your mind, wrestling with your own demons, shaping something out of nothing. It's creating. And that's why I'm here. That's why I make these episodes. To remind you and to remind myself that writing matters. That even when nobody else sees it, it has value, tremendous value. And today I want to talk to you about joy. Not the fleeting surface joy of praise or good news, but the deep, sustaining joy that actually carries you through this marathon. The joy that makes you show up even when you're exhausted, even when you're discouraged, even when it feels like the world is telling you to quit. The brutal truth about writing is it's not a fast return career. It doesn't work like a paycheck. You're not clocking in, clocking out, and then having your direct deposit arrive every 2 weeks. It's a gamble. It's uncertain. You put your chips down, spin the wheel, and sometimes you don't even know the result for years. For me, it was 9 years from the day I started writing until my first book hit the bookshelves. So how do you survive that? How do you keep going when the reward is so delayed and so uncertain and so dependent on factors you can't control? You know, I've thought about this a lot. And I think the answer is you have to treat your writing like a startup company. And more importantly, you have to find joy in that startup phase, because if you don't, if you're only in this for the big payoff, I can guarantee you, you won't last. So let's unpack this idea of writing as a startup. Think about startup companies. They're brutal. They take long hours. They burn through money. They're unstable. And honestly, most of them fail. Picture a founder in the garage tinkering with an idea no one else understands. Friends are asking, "Why don't you get a normal job?" Parents are worrying. The bank account is shrinking. And yet that founder keeps showing up. That's you. That's writers. And your manuscript is your prototype. Your drafts are your iterations. Every time you revise, you're pivoting. Every time you query an agent, you're in a funding round trying to convince somebody to believe in you. And rejection? Rejection is simply another investor saying, not right now, it's not for us. And I'll tell you, most people, when they're faced with that kind of resistance, they would walk away. And honestly, sometimes I think they'd be smart to. Who wants to work 10 years with no guarantee of a return? But writers, we stay. We stay because the building itself brings us joy. Because even if nobody buys the product, boy, we love making it. Now let's extend the metaphor further. In startup culture, there's something called bootstrapping. That means building without outside funding. No investors, no safety net. Just you, your sweat, your time, your savings. Writers bootstrap every single day. Before you get an agent, before you sign a deal, before you publish, you're bootstrapping. You're investing time, energy, and often money on courses, workshops, conferences, social media, into something that isn't paying you back yet. And then there's burn rate. In startups, burn rate is really how fast you're spending your cash before revenue comes in. And we all know if the burn rate is too high, the startup collapses before it has a chance to succeed. Us writers, we have a burn rate too, but it's not just money, it's energy. If you burn yourself out too quickly, writing obsessively for 2 months and then quitting for 6 more, you'll collapse. You lose momentum. Worse, you lose faith. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. A sustainable burn rate keeps you alive long enough to succeed. And then there's pivoting, which is something every startup does. They start with one idea, realize it's not quite working, and shift to another. For us, that's called rewriting. That's shelving a project. That's changing POV halfway through. It might feel like failure, but I can tell you it's not. It's survival. And I have 10 books published, and the rewrites are fierce every single time. Even the concept of a minimum viable project applies. In startup, that's the scrappy first version that proves an idea has legs. For writers, that's the first draft. It's ugly, messy, incomplete. But it's evidence that there's something there. And I will tell you, just like startups, most writers don't make it because they quit too soon. Not because the idea wasn't good, not because they didn't have talent, but because they couldn't sustain themselves long enough to see it through. Which brings us back to joy, because joy is what keeps you in the game when there's no external reward. Joy is the fuel that lets you outlast the setbacks. Joy is the difference between quitting at manuscript 3 and pushing on to manuscript 5, which might be the one that could finally break through. So I'll tell you about my own startup phase. When I first started writing, I had no roadmap. I didn't know the industry. I didn't know how publishing worked. I didn't know what a query letter was. I just had an impulse. I wanted to tell a story. And I wrote my first book in 90 days, and I can guarantee you it was not good. But I sent it out anyway, and rejections piled up, and I had 75 agent rejections. And then by the grace of all good fortune, I landed an agent with that first crappy manuscript, because that agent saw something in it, knowing that it would have to be rewritten fully. And that book never sold. It took a year to shop out to different publishers, and they all rejected it. And that happened with manuscripts 2 and 3. My agent stuck with me, but for years and years and years, there was nothing. I kept writing. I kept trying to learn. I kept reading those rejection letters from these high-profile editors, and to learn from their advice, to learn from their words of why they didn't like my manuscript. And finally, with my 4th manuscript, we sold it. And it wasn't for much. In fact, it's funny, I just found that very first check that I received. My advance was $1,000 to a tiny little publisher. And then I had to pay my 15% commission to my agent. So my first check was $850 after 9 years of writing. That was what I had earned. But I kept writing, and people will ask me sometimes, how could you keep at it with all that failure, all that rejection? And it's because I found joy in the act of writing itself. I found joy in sitting down every morning, opening the laptop, and discovering what happens next. That was the constant then, and it's the constant now. It's what sustains me. And I'll tell you something else. Every single successful author I know has their own version of this story. Years of invisibility, years of failure, years of rejection. And the only reason they made it is because they loved the work long enough to keep going. So let's talk about you. Why do you write? Is it because you want your name on a cover? Is it because you crave recognition? I certainly hope it's not because you're chasing a paycheck. Or is it because writing feels like oxygen? Because you can't not do it? Because the act itself is what fills you up? This is something I ask any student that I work with. Why? Why do you write? And I make them really be self-reflective and be honest. So ask yourself this: why do you write? And there's no shame in your answer. But clarity matters. If your fuel is only recognition, I promise you, you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. Because recognition is fickle, it's slow, and it is completely out of your control. But joy? Joy is always available. Joy is what you can cultivate on your own, right now, today, without anyone else's permission. So here's an even harder question to ask yourself. Would you keep writing if you knew you'd never be published? Would you keep showing up even if no one ever saw your words? Sit with that for a second and think about what comes up. Fear? Relief, maybe? Resistance? Excitement? There are no wrong feelings to have. These feelings are data. They're signals. They tell you how deep this runs. And if your gut says, yeah, I'd keep writing anyway, then I would suggest you found something powerful. You found your joy. Now let's talk about discipline. Some people think discipline kills joy. They think routine makes things stale. But I think the truth is the opposite. I think discipline is what allows joy to deepen. Because I've come to realize over 20 plus years of doing this, if you treat writing like a hobby, something that you just dabble in when you feel like it, your joy will stay shallow. Because you won't get good enough, consistent enough, committed enough to reach the deep rewards. But when you treat it like a job, when you commit to showing up every day, you create space for joy to grow. My routine, I write for an hour every morning. I usually go to a Starbucks. That's what I do. Rain or shine, good mood, bad mood, inspired, uninspired. I go. It's my job. Some days the words come easily and some days they don't. But showing up is what matters. Because that consistency builds momentum. And the momentum feeds joy. It's like a runner training for a marathon. They don't love every mile. Some are painful, some are miserable. But discipline allows them to find joy in the process as a whole. Writing works the same way. Not every session will feel good. But I promise you, every session matters. And the discipline of showing up is what gives you the chance to experience joy. And here's a piece that often gets overlooked. Community. Startup founders don't survive alone. They have mentors, advisors, fellow entrepreneurs who understand the grind. They go to conferences, pitch nights, networking events, not just for funding, but for solidarity. Writers need the same thing, because if you try to do this in complete isolation, your odds of quitting skyrocket. You need people who get it. You need critique partners, writing groups, other author friends. You need voices that can say, yeah, me too. I know how hard this is. I started going to writing conferences several years before I had a book deal. And it wasn't easy. I remember wanting to meet people and not knowing what to say. I remember going and seeing these high-profile authors and feeling like they were unapproachable. But over time, I put myself out there. I walked up to them. I put my hand out and introduced myself. And I found out they were some of the nicest people I've ever met. And I kept going, and years and years and years later, I've got this amazing community, people who live all over the world, that I've become friends with, people who I can call and say, I need your advice. And they do the same with me. When you share the load, you protect your joy. When you connect with others, you remember you're not crazy for doing this. So how do you treat writing like the startup company it is? Let's go through some practical steps. Schedule it. Put your writing time on the calendar. Treat it like a meeting you can't miss, an important meeting. Manage your burn rate. Don't write in unsustainable sprints. Pace yourself. Don't wait for the muse. Don't wait for inspiration. Build the muscle. Show up every day to your job. It's what's expected of you. Pivot when needed. If a project stalls, shift direction. Don't see it as a failure. It's just strategy. And you will need to pivot with almost anything that you write. You're going to be writing a manuscript and you'll realize it's not singing. And you might have to do some major, massive changes to get it to sing. Put in the work. Celebrate small wins. Every word counts. Every scene finished is progress, even if you end up deleting that scene later. The hardest thing to do is to write that crappy first draft. Plow through. Lean on community. Find people who get it. Join a critique group. Find beta readers. Find online discussion forums. Protect each other's joy. And finally, reconnect with your why. Regularly remind yourself why you started. Remind yourself why you do it. Write your why on a piece of paper and tape it to your monitor. Why do you write? So here's what I want you to remember. Writing is not sustained by money. It is not sustained by recognition. Those things are temporary and unpredictable. Writing is sustained by passion, by discipline, and community. Most of all, writing is sustained by joy. And if you treat your writing like the startup it is, if you treat it like the job it deserves to be, and if you let joy be your fuel, I promise you, you will last. And lasting is everything. So take a breath, sit with that truth, and go write. Thank you for spending time with me. If this resonated, please subscribe and share Motivations for Writers with someone else who you think might need it. I'll see you next time.